interurbans in Minnesota are kind of an interesting phenomenon. Um, from about 1905 to 1915 was the interurban craze, and it was really a bridge technology between steam trains and wagons on the one end and automobiles on the other. And it was designed to kind of fill the short distance gap between cities that were close together but didn't have very good train service, and also rural communities, farms that didn't have stops anywhere near. And so in that period, about 15,000 miles of these things were built, all often in duplication with steam railroads. And so in Minnesota, we had five interurbans. We had the Mesabi Electric on the Iron Range, the St. Paul Southern, the Minneapolis and Oka-Cuyuna Range, and you really have to count Twin City lines, Stillwater and Lake Minnetonka lines as interurbans because they had separate equipment and they ran through open country. And so I had put this map in. You can see my fine graphics capabilities on this map, but during the interurban craze, there were tons of stillborn projects that were existing on paper and never happened. And this map shows them in the gray. For example, there was going to be one that ran the North Shore from Duluth all the way up to Grand Marais. There were multiple ones to go up to St. Cloud. This is actually, there were like two or three of them that were going to do this, or up to Little Falls or Mille Lacs. This is the Minnesota Western, which I'll get to. There was going to be one across what is now the I-90 corridor, and there were various others to go kind of down the Mississippi. And this one right here, which was Minnesota Northwestern, and it really only got built between Goodrich and Thief River Falls. So anyway, you had all of these interurban schemes that didn't happen, and also a proposed interurban Grand Central Depot in downtown Minneapolis that didn't happen. And so in addition to the ones that actually got built, you had the interurban wannabes, which were the Dan Patch line, the Loose line, and the Minnesota Northwestern Electric, which had every intention of becoming interurbans, but never electrified. But even so, we consider them within our collections policy, our purview. And so the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, and Dubuque, the Dan Patch line, was going to go all the way to Dubuque through Rochester. Now, the map of where they were going to go changed repeatedly because although they built starting from the Minneapolis city limits and they built down to Northfield, and they actually did some grading towards, Faribault. They were out there courting all these towns, looking for financial support and all that. And so there's multiple versions of this map showing where, if they got where they would consider going if they got a favorable response from the town. So it moved all over the place. And so I guess it was in 1909, 1910 that they started from the Minneapolis city limits, which at the time was 54th Street, Diamond Lake Road. And they built it down to Antlers Park and to Northfield. And they negotiated trackage rights agreement. Now, once again, they graded partway to Faribault, and after a while, it was like, there were already three railroads from Northfield to Faribault: the Milwaukee Road, the Great Western, and the Rock Island. And so they really didn't need a fourth one. So they went and negotiated trackage rights over the Chicago Great Western to Faribault, and then later negotiated trackage rights over the Great Western down here to Mankato and back to Randolph about here. And they did, in fact, put in stops about every mile. This is true in urban fashion, about every mile along the line. And they instituted a summer service to Antlers Park where they had a little resort. And they went and ran the thing with gas electric cars. And so even though they never electrified, they were the first internal combustion powered railroad in the United States. And they used gas electrics. Now, gas electrics what's interesting is this is essentially the same thing as a hybrid automobile, in that there's an engine that's providing power for motors down in the wheels. And they first started out and they bought 3 of these cars. These are called Strang cars. And they ran originally on the Strang line out of Kansas City down to, and Brian, you can correct me, is it Olaf or Olathi? How do you pronounce it?
Olathe.
Olathe. See, I got it wrong. But anyway, these cars ran there for a short time and they bought them very ornate inside, never repeated. And these were their initial gas electric cars. And this is probably Dan Patch right here, I'm guessing. Here's the inside of the thing.
Aaron, do you know the length of that car?
Well, I'm going to guess that it is between like 65 feet or so. That's about as long as a wood frame car got, 65, maybe 70, but I sort of doubt it. And here it is, or one of the others. Now, the idea was that they were going to go and they built a track to 50th and Nicollet, and they were going to have a deal where they ran over the Minneapolis Street Railway, over the Nicollet Avenue line to downtown. The Minneapolis Street Railway never agreed to that. And so they wound up making connections at 50th and Nicollet. But the problem was, here they are on the north end of the Minnehaha Creek Bridge. And if you look up here, and if you know the street, there's a pretty darn steep hill up to about 52nd and then down to 50th. And the problem was, well, there were a couple problems. The first one was they didn't have a franchise with the city of Minneapolis to do this. So they had built this track illegally. The second thing is the residents who were down between 50th and 54th said, we don't want this with about 6 trains a day. We want streetcar service over the hill. And then the third problem was they really had a very hard time getting a full one of these with a trailer up the hill and down the other side. And so they did one of 2 things. They would have the people walk over the hill, which was about a third of a mile, or they would do this. They had another small Strang car, the Ogarita. And what I think is that the Ogarita has gone over the hill, met the streetcar, brought these people down, and they're loading in the big car on the north end of the bridge. So this only went on for about a year. And finally, Twin City Line said, we'll take over the track from 50th down to 54th. And that's when they cut this thing back to a depot at 54th, which is right where the Holiday Station is at Diamond Lake and Nicollet. And then they would transfer people.
Can you think of any reason why the tracks are so wiggly up the hill?
That is not the track. That's tire tracks for a wagon or something. Because you can see they're off center, and this thing here would have been centered, or at least not over there. So Marion Savage, who Savage is named after and the owner of Dan Patch, did lots and lots of marketing. He was a marketing guy. And in his marketing, he always kind of overpromised. The track was always built further than it was actually built at the time of the marketing, and there was always more financial support. But nonetheless, he put out a lot of interesting advertising. And they got rid of the Strang cars after a couple of years, and they substituted General Electric gas cars, which apparently were much more reliable and were used by a lot of railroads. They were really the first generation of reasonably reliable gas electric cars. The McKean cars that preceded them were gas mechanical and were much more picky and did not operate on this line. So anyway, they cut it back to this depot, and you can see by the little angle that it parallels the angle of Diamond Lake Road where the Holiday Station is. So the cars would come out, and you had this little depot, and then they'd transfer. And here's another view. You can see the depot. They're loading express on the cars. Here's the horseshoe shield. And here they are. I'm guessing this is probably out at Antlers Park because you got people getting on and off, and you can see that they had a bunch of these open platform trailers that were built, um, delivered along with the car. They had, I don't know, something like 19 or so of these gas electric cars and trailers. They had a pretty big fleet. This is also almost certainly out at Antlers Park. And of course, they built number 100 and two other locomotives, either two or three other locomotives that were more squared off. I'll show a picture of that. Now, if you see 100 today, it's squared off on one end, and the reason is that it had a wreck. It ran into a freight car about a year after they purchased it, and they crushed one end, and they had to rebuild the end, and they squared it off, and you'll see a picture of that. So here it is, not quite sure where, somewhere down in Richfield or Bloomington. This looks like an elevated trailer back here. I don't know where they got it from. Here's one of the other engines. And there's only this is the only picture I've ever seen of these engines. And so the Dan Patch locomotive actually would haul passengers and freight. And I'm guessing that this is at Antlers Park on the Y, because they would go in Y trains out there. Here it is in the later years, because of course it had a long life with the squared off end. Interestingly, when they squared off the end, the windows that they used were windows that they used in the gas electric cars. And so these are probably the only gas electric car windows. They also had the same trucks as the gas electric cars that are still in existence anywhere. And they sprouted a couple of spurs there. This is the Bachman spur going into the Bachman's greenhouse down by 59th and Nicollet. That spur, that spur is an extension of the one that still exists, where I forget, Minnesota Stone or whatever they are, where they unload all kinds of sand and cement and stuff, and that thing used to extend across Lyndale Avenue to the greenhouses.
Are you talking about?
Hey, Aaron, go back to that prior one. That device at the corner of, nope.
Where
forward. The Bachman.
Oh, the
The
Bachman.
Bachman.
What
Yeah,
about it?
that device at the corner of the greenhouse is a rail drill, manually powered rail drill.
Oh, I'll be darned. Good catch. Okay,
Talking
interesting.
about the that sort of Minnesota Stone Company, or I'm not sure the name of it. Are you talking about the one that's on like 60th between Nicollet and Lyndale?
It's on 61st, yeah.
Okay. Yes.
It's basically the end of track.
Mhm.
And in the other direction, it turns and goes through Lejeune Steel. And if you go into kind of the parking lot of Lejeune Steel or the east side, you'll see that the rails go all the way to the sidewalk of Nicollet Avenue. They're kind of buried in the gravel, but they're still there. And so they cut it back there in, I don't know, like 1922. So here's another view of Bachman's loading flowers, of all things. And they weren't doing particularly well carrying passengers up to 54th and Nicollet, and certainly not hauling much in the way of freight. And so in 1915, they went and they built the line up through the western suburbs and got to downtown Minneapolis. And after that, they ran this little rail bus shuttle from, I don't know, like 1915 to about 1922, up to 54th. And that was the end of passenger service on what they call the High Line, up through Richfield and Bloomington to Nicollet Avenue. And so it was after, in 1922, that they got rid of the depot at 54th and they cut it back. And so here's a timetable just kind of showing, I forget what year. Yeah, this is 1918. So you can see they're running the trains through to downtown Minneapolis. And they have, this is the little rail bus shuttle running back and forth between 54th Street and Auto Club Junction in Western Bloomington, meeting all of these other trains. And then that quit in 1922. But you can see the station spacing, and there's basically a station every mile or sometimes even every half mile as you went along here. And that was classic interurban. So here you are in the engine compartment of one of the gas electric cars. And the whole kind of financial house of cards that was the Dan Patch line simply collapsed in 1916 in spectacular fashion. Dan Patch died, and Marion Savage, who was the owner of Dan Patch, was apparently much more emotionally invested in the horse than anyone realized. And he had just come off, I think it was hernia surgery, just like me, and learned of Dan Patch's death, and a week later died himself at age, I don't know, 52 or something like that. So, and a week later, the company went into receivership. And all but 2 of the gas electric cars were sold off. The gasoline freight locomotives were sold off. The receiver was Charles Bratnober, who ran the Central Warehouse and the Minneapolis, Anoka, and Cuyuna Range. And he took Locomotive 100 and assigned it to the Central Warehouse and electrified it, and then later passed it on to the Dan Patch in 3 years. So anyway, they did continue after that to run a fairly spare passenger service, and this is it in the final years, in the late 30s or early 40s. It quit in 1941, and this is it at the Minneapolis depot. And this was the very last day. This is a newspaper photo in Lakeville in 1941.
Isn't at least one of those cars at MSM?
What do you mean at MSM?
Minnesota, the over in St. Paul, the museum.
No, none of these cars exist anymore. What they have over there is a Dan Patch locomotive.
Okay.
Yeah. Matter of fact, to the best of my knowledge, none of these cars anywhere in the United States have been preserved. I took this picture. This is at the very north end. This is at 61st and Nicollet, the track that's still there, and it's the original 1910 rail. Still there and running up from Bloomington. So then the other one that wanted to be an interurban was the loose line, the Minnesota Western. And this was what they thought they were going to do. They thought they were going to go all the way to Watertown, South Dakota, and they thought they were going to run branches down to Redwood Falls and Marshall, and down to New Ulm, and up to Litchfield. And of course, most of that never happened. What they did do is they ran in stages out as far as, well, this is Clara City, out as far as a non-location called Glick. The Glick brewing family was one of the financial supporters, and so they founded a little tiny town called Glick, named it for them. And it finally got out there in 1926, which was one of the last railroads built in Minnesota. But they were going to be an interurban. And you can see loose electric lines, named for the Luce family. And here they are at the downtown station. Now, they also bought, before they got a bunch of those GE gas cars, they went and bought a couple of real pioneer gas electrics. This car was built by the Delaware and Hudson. They converted a combine, a wood combine, into a gas electric car. And apparently it didn't work well for them, but the Luce line picked it up. And here's that same car, and this is out in Winstead in 1915, and this is, everybody has come in to greet the very first train into Winstead. This railroad, you know, it took a long time to get it built. It was 1915 to Winstead, and then, I don't know, like 1916 or 17 to Hutchinson, and finally 1926 out to the end of the line. This is the other weird car. This is a Drake car. And I forget where this came from, but they bought this one used as well. And it looks like an Inter-Urban, but it's a gas electric. And once again, taken in downtown. Here it is. Not quite sure. I think it's out in Golden Valley or something somewhere. And so then they wound up themselves with a small fleet of these GE gas cars. Here they are at the downtown Minneapolis station, which they shared with the Dan Patch and they shared with the Minneapolis, Anoka, and Cuyuna Range that parked on the north side of it. Here in the background, you can see Butler Square that's still there. Here's another view. This is a good view because it actually shows the Anoka car sitting by the station.
I'm thinking that the motors in those cars, the gas motor, must have been awfully loud.
I'm doubting that it was muffled very much. I think
Right.
the engineers probably wanted to wear earplugs or something.
Yeah. I would think even for passengers, it would be a loud thing to be talking over.
And while this is a loose line car, this is a Dan Patch trailer because the Dan Patch eventually took over the loose line by the 30s. Well, actually, no, I guess they did it in 1927. And so the fleets kind of got mixed. And this is the Worth Parkway Bridge. And so this is the combined Dan Patch loose line going right through the Worth Park Golf Course. There's still a track there today. And like all of these things, they created a little resort out at Parker's Lake. Oh, about, I don't know, a dozen miles out or so. So they could go and run stuff out there. They also had, for a couple of years, a little branch, a little 1 mile branch up the west side of Medicine Lake. And their train I think it was in the eastbound direction, would go and back up that branch. It would make a detour up the branch twice a day. This is also at Parker's Lake. I got this from, I want to say, the Plymouth Historical Society. It was either that or the Golden Valley Historical Society. And here you see the car in the distance. And once they got west of Lake Minnetonka, they crossed over the Great Northern. Now, it's not the same bridge today, but the loose line trail still crosses over the Great Northern on a bridge here. And they had, of all things, a Pullman car. I'm not quite sure how long they used it or if they ever tried to do an overnight, but they owned it. And this is out there at Winstead. You can see this is crossing the corner of the lake southeast of Winstead. Here's the town up here. And then the final line was the Minnesota Northwestern Electric, which was going to try to go to International Falls across the enormous swamp and never got there. It was purchased by the Sioux Line. Its power, it always remained corporately separate, and its power, which they used both for passengers and freight, was this one gas car. Dave French has been out there, and you can still see where the right-of-way is, and apparently the depot, Dave photographed the depot out of Goodrich, which was the end of the line. It was just flat and straight out through the farm country, but once again, there was a stop about once every mile.